Hello and welcome to another episode of the Petey Performance Podcast. I'm sitting here today in Limerick City with Adrian O'Brien, who is working currently with the Tipperary senior football team. He's worked in rugby in the past, he's worked in Gaelic football in the past, and he's worked extensively in hurling. You might not think that two strength and conditioning coaches would go this deep on skill acquisition, building culture, and how to be an inter-county athlete. However, we did so. So hopefully you all enjoy it, and please remember to like it, share it, and send it. Adrian O'Brien, welcome to the Petey Performance Podcast, round 2, episode 152. We were just reflecting there on the first time I reached out to you, and we're back into it now again. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Chris. And we might as well go through it again just because it was actually a nice little introduction to the podcast. The first time I reached out to you was this time probably 4 years ago or so, when I was starting the gym during COVID, and you were pushing me, maybe in the direction, not pushing me, but guiding me towards a position where I maybe wouldn't have thought that was the best thing to do. And I was being the natural optimist that I am, and I was saying, well, it could work out, so I might as well give it a go. And I learned a lot of lessons over the course of that process. You actually had a gym back then as well, and you don't anymore.
No, I had a gym in a beautiful little village in County Limerick called Arpatrick. Lovely, on the foothill of the Ballyhowra Mountains. So I was there for 6 years, maybe not 6, 5 anyway. And we had a great little gym there. It was kind of semi-private PT is how I was working at the time. And then when you reached out to me around that COVID time, everything had changed. We were shut down, and I can remember that evening. I can just remember my last evening in the gym. I think it was a Wednesday, and there were a couple of nurses who were members, and they were talking about COVID, and we were going to be shut down. And little did I know that day when I just locked up that I just never reopened. I think I was probably at a different stage. I had my time done in the gym, and I was involved with Limerick football at the time, and I was finding it very hard to juggle both. And I really wanted to go down fully into, the athletic development from a team perspective in that, I guess, elite GA environment. And it was a kind of an easy decision for me at the time, because the gym wasn't going to be reopened anytime soon. And I remember coming home and I was taking stock and I was reflecting, and I got the phone call from you, and you were coming this ball of optimism, and you were telling me you were thinking about opening a gym. You were back from Singapore, and I was thinking, geez, the timing mightn't be great here now, social distancing. You can't travel X amount of kilometres outside of your town. That was actually even before any of those constraints came on us. And
I think we were after reopening.
Were we?
Because we were closed for the summer. And then I was thinking, look, they can't keep doing this. They're not going to do it again.
You're actually right. It was March when we closed, and we reopened, I think, around June.
Yeah, I think I rang you maybe in July.
Yeah, that's right. And they graded businesses based on who could reopen and who couldn't. And I was probably a little bit, I guess when I look back on it now, if I was to reflect, that that term essential workers, that kind of grated at me at the time as well, because I think everyone is essential in their own right. Everyone brings value to people, and I can understand why they've done it. But
the question is, essential to who?
Essential to who? Yeah, exactly. And people were kind of manipulating that slightly too, weren't they? What I mean? And I just kind of, I suppose, was at the point there where it was a big reflection period for me when you rang, and I thought, something, it'd be really hard, because it's so hard to social distance in a gym. It's so hard. Let's call a spade a spade. The gym environment isn't the cleanest environment, as a rule of thumb. You have a lot of people sweating, heart rates elevated, cortisol is high. It's probably the perfect environment to transmit infections, if truth be told. People are tired, they're sweating on things, and I just thought, gym is going to be the last places really to kind of get off the ground again here. And then the other side of it, I was thinking, how would the whole industry recover? Because people were buying home equipment. There was this big rush for people to buy off Dundee, and I was thinking, the people who were in the online space were thriving, and I was thinking, is there going to be, a shift in terms of future behaviours and trends and how people use gyms? Will people educate themselves and upskill themselves on, how to read programs and, how to do this in their own time and save travel, and people are going to be working from home, and if they have the equipment, it might work out for them. And there was a lot of questions around that time.
A lot of uncertainty, and I was almost entering the uncertainty with like an uninformed optimism about it. So you were trying to protect me in a sense, but I think I had to do that.
Absolutely.
And I learned so much through that process of trying to run a gym while still improve my coaching and my knowledge and try to deliver that in a digestible manner to the athletes that I was working with. And I wouldn't be where I am now if I didn't do it. And the podcast wasn't even, I think it was maybe in my mind at that time. I'd written down a few notes of who I'd like to come on, and you were actually in the notes way back then, back in 2019, I'd say.
Yeah, 5-6 years ago, yeah.
And now we're 150 episodes later, and I'm thinking about how it's the appropriate time to have you on now, because, and a similar thing to what you're talking about coaching, I now only do podcasts in person because I believe you lose a lot in the conversation, in the energy transfer between the guest and the host, or two people in the room, through the virtual, I suppose, landscape and through Zoom. And I think that's what we've learned through COVID, is the art of being able to connect with people, listen to people, understand people, and develop a relationship with them. That's not going to be replaced by technology or online programming as such. From a conversation I had with Robbie Burke last week, I think we can do a lot online for sure, but we can't do everything.
No, absolutely not. And that was, again, to bring it back to my thought process that time at the gym as well. A big part of what I done when we did have the gym at the time, it was that human connection. We had 60-minute slots of a semi-private PT. And the first 5 minutes was a connection piece. And human touch was part of that, And I just always felt, well, what I'm going to deliver in terms of my methodology, in terms of my principles, in terms of how I see movement and how I see coaching, is going to be compromised if I have to come back and, adhere to certain guidelines and constraints around how many people I can have in a session. Even though it was still semi-private PT, did I have to put plastic screens up between people? Like, these were all the questions I was asking at the time. And I just felt, in terms of what I did, it being very much movement-based, the connecting back to the community, connecting back to people, I just felt it was going to be compromised.
I remember you saying that to me as well, like as a piece of advice, I suppose, was the connection and the community aspect was everything. And it's something that's hard to do online as such, as develop that community. And even with a lot of the really successful online coaches or people working in the online space, you'll see that they set aside opportunities for connection with clients and people within the group so that they can meet like-minded people, so they can connect. And the dog comes in. How are you going? Do you know what? We'll keep it rolling.
Oh, absolutely.
Because that's what happens in podcasting. But that's real, I suppose. That's exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And I feel that people that are successful in the online space, they understand that, and they understand the value in connection and developing a community. Whereas the people that don't understand that and try to do so completely online, they almost are consistently cycling through clients and chasing more new clients because they're not retaining people into the community, because they're missing that connection aspect. And sure, their system works for the individual for a certain amount of time where they're implementing it, and the coach is very heavy and overbearing on them in terms of, have you done this, have you done that? But that's not really inducing habit change on a macro level, really. So it has to be a lifestyle change overall if somebody's going to adhere to that long term. In some cases, maybe it might be being achieved, and then the person is saying, I feel confident now and empowered enough to go and do this by myself, which is completely fine. But I think in a lot of, I was having this conversation recently as well, I think a lot of coaches now, when they finish college, they're not even a coach yet. They're thinking, I need to go into online straight away. And they're losing that personability and that ability to connect and just ability to converse and understand somebody and meet them on a level.
And ability to coach.
Yeah, and the coaching as well.
Yeah.
Like, exactly.
And if I refer this back to when I had the gym, I noticed after the first couple of years, the conversations with clients was what people initially came for isn't what they stayed for. So people would initially come with a problem, and you had a solution, or the perception was you had a solution. So whether it be to get bigger, faster, stronger, fitter, leaner, whatever it was. But then over time, I started to notice that it was the bonds, it was the connections, it was the relationships. And it's even if we talk about GAA for a second, and we talk about, 'cause in our off air, we were having a conversation around, juvenile coaching. Like the biggest issue in the GAA, potentially, and the biggest risk at the moment that we have in every club up and down the country is trying to retain participants. And I like, my world is the GAA, right? So every evening I'm in clubs. That's where I make my living. And I see so many clubs with really good facilities, really good astroturfs, really good gyms, tree fields, floodlights. But the same issues are there. And the reality is that, kids don't leave because of facilities. It's not that, the gym isn't good enough, or there isn't an astro, or the field or the pitch isn't good enough. It's relationships and experiences. And it's no different in the gym world. It's about how you make people feel and how connected they feel to the people around them. And that is universal across team sport, across gyms, across every aspect of life. We're social creatures. That connection piece is, and again, like, we've sports science backgrounds, and we come from a background where we can measure everything. You can't measure energy. You can't measure these intangible drivers of, number one, drivers of performance, but also just drivers of health and long-term health and longevity.
Maybe we could rate it on a 1 to 10 scale.
You can. Yeah,
and we want to as well, is the other thing. In our reflection piece at the end of the year, probably say to the players, could you rate the energy out of 10?
Yeah.
And we'll see if we can improve on that the next time around. So if we are to retain players and the problem as well is not solely in the GAA, it's in sport in general. It's kids not being interested in playing sports. So from my perspective, I think Gaelic games and the GAA have to move with the times a little bit in that regard, because I think how the sport is seen gets people in the door, but how they feel when they're in the building is what keeps them, as you said.
Yeah.
And you only have to look at the National Athletics Championships at the weekend that were the highest attended on record, I think, and everybody going crazy for Rashida Adeleke because they've seen that on a screen over the last few months and weeks. And then for that reason, because it's attractive seeing that, the kids have a reason to aspire. And when they turn up to training, sure, they're thinking, I want to go and play with my friends and I want to give it a go. But some of them are probably thinking, I could be just like Rashida Adeleke, or I could be just like Garrod Hegarty, or I could be just like Aaron Gillan or whoever. Yeah. So I think we have to get both of those right in terms of striking a balance. But it comes back to probably, I think we go too far down one side or the other, and Gaelic games they've become almost manufactured in a way, haven't they? And we've been closed off from insights into who the players are. Yeah. And the players have been closed off from the outside world altogether, pretty much. Yeah. And I think for that reason, people have lost touch, and that may be one of the reasons that attendances are going down. It's multifactorial, obviously, but
yeah, it's multifactorial. Definitely multifactorial. I think that in terms of retaining younger players, we have an unbelievably good product. Like, it's, I sometimes I don't think we step back, even though, like, sometimes the closer you are to something, the less you see. And it's not until you're out of the country and you watch a game and you walk past people who haven't seen the game and you look at their faces and they're thinking, you're telling me that this is happening somewhere in the world, and you're saying, yeah, and they're amateur players, yeah, and there's no one getting paid there, yeah, and there's 55,000 people watching, yeah. It's a phenomenal product we have, you know, it's an amazing product we have. And I think that it's a very hard nut to crack because we have a mad calendar. You know, if you look at your average, and not even your average, look at a 20-year-old high performing GA player who's in college, playing Sigerson or playing Fitzgibbon. They're on their county under 20 panel. Some could be on a county senior panel. Then they go back to their club. It's 12 months of the year. It's consistent. It's all year round. And there's very small windows of opportunity then within that for them to have lives. And that's just the reality of it. And I just think that it's really, really difficult to manage what we have, but the gift is the curse, because, you know, what we have is really, really special.
Is it maybe the lens that we look through to view it that might be the issue? Because just what you're talking about in terms of the calendar and all of the participation that's expected of the players and what it evokes in me, it's almost like the old school mentality of sport as recreation is what we're setting up the calendar for, but then we're expecting elite level performance.
Yeah. 12 months of the year.
12 months of the year. Whereas in other sports, say Premier League or whatever, it's not really thought about they're going to connect with other members of the community.
Yeah.
It's, we're going to play a sport to entertain people and get people in through the door. Give them something to belong to, for sure. But we're almost expecting players to play 2-3 matches a week, because that's what was done 100 years ago to get people to connect and share a sense of Irish cultural identity, which we still can do. But then we're saying, well, we also want you to perform at physical levels that are better than those playing in the Premier League or playing in
and we are
the URC. We are, exactly.
Yeah. I think that a lot of that comes down to the individual groups. Like, in reality, you know, enjoyment has got to be at the centre, definitely at the centre of much of what we do in GA. And that goes from the elite level down to your junior C team playing recreation in the weekend. If you don't enjoy it, then it becomes a chore, and it's a sacrifice as opposed to being a choice. And in the GAA, the way that calendar is, that sacrifice will be amplified very, very, very quickly. Very quickly. Because for the vast majority of even inter-county teams, the reward is very, very minimal. Like, we see this in Division 4 and Division 3 Gaelic football teams, and you see the turnover of players consistently because, you know, the time commitment is massive. It's huge. And if there isn't an enjoyment piece in that, then there's too many other things that are going to pull these lads away and ladies away. Like, you know, there's immigration, there's jobs, and there's just other areas there's other things that they're going to be drawn towards doing.
And there can only be one winner, unfortunately. Yeah. That's the way it's set up.
Yeah.
Well, maybe two now that we've the Tailteann Cup as well, like, and multiple leagues.
And you've leagues, yeah. Unless you've a very dominant team that win everything.
Yeah. I'm sure Dublin are gone now with the football, so it's grand. But Limerick are still in the hurling, unfortunately. I'll say unfortunately anyway. But yeah, like, it's interesting because it is a conundrum of how do we increase participation levels. And I would be... like, obviously we're both biased because of the lens that we look through it, but my major thing with young athletes in particular is, okay, how do we retain the athletes that are here now in the sport? And to facilitate their enjoyment, we elevate the standards of training and our structures and have constraints in there that make it fun and make it challenging for each individual that turns up to play. But then a major issue in both juvenile and adult sport, especially the GA because of the demands, is the injury rates are really, really high. So from looking through my bias lens of physical performance, I'm saying, well, maybe if we gave them the resources of 15 to 20 minutes of S&C per week and we managed their loads appropriately, or taught the parents how to manage their loads of each of their kids, then they'd be more likely to not suffer injury, and then they'd be more likely to play the sport long term. But that's obviously a very biased lens through which to look through, or to look at the sport. But it's probably necessary in the profession that I'm in to show up every day and do my best. And you have kind of a very individual role in a sense, or you've a very integrated approach to performance. So you try to look at it from multiple different areas, and that's something that a lot of your athletes will attest to when we're speaking about you. How do you reframe it in your mind to step back and say, oh, am I going to S&C here, or am I going to hurling coach or skills coach, or is it too psychological now, or do you not think about it at all?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good question. Like, how can you be critical in your distribution of training units? I guess that it really just depends, right? Because if you get involved with a club, and like I am, and I'm hurling coaching, and I'm in control of the schedule, and I'm in control of the loading, and I'm in control of the gym program, and I have an awful lot of control, then I just don't see it. I just see it as training. And intuitively, I will know, because of how I have the week set up, that there's a clear differentiation between stressors from a physical standpoint. But there's also a clear differentiation between learning outcomes from a technical and tactical standpoint as well. So if on our Tuesday night session, we're going to address some area of our game model, I will know what player numbers, what pitch sizes are going to induce whatever level of mechanical loading on the player. I will know what work-rest ratios I need to work with to facilitate whatever physiological adaptation I'm looking for. And I will know player numbers and how this is going to affect decision making, and more importantly, how representative is this to what happened last Sunday. And it's just something that you just do over time, and when you have a very clear defined model in your own mind that's underpinned by, I guess, a clear understanding of physiology and loading and biomechanics and the spatio-temporal demands of whatever position is there, it's really easy to do it. It gets very difficult to do it when you're in a setup where you're just in charge of the S&C piece, because now you have the strength of the relationship with the people around you. Because, and look, we'll all refer back to, Fergus Connolly's coactive model, and like that, if I had any advice to any young coach, it's to read Game Changer. Like, it's just such an incredible book. But when we get involved, it depends on, okay, what's the philosophy here from the manager? Is the manager very much, you're an S&C, you stay in your lane. You warm them up for 10 minutes, and then you'll run them afterwards after training, and I'll talk to you again on Friday. I don't want to know about training loads. I don't want to know about this kind of stuff, because we're 6 months behind everyone else and we need to get fitter. And this is just kind of some of the conversations that are out there. And then you may have, a coach who is very defensive, or maybe even a little bit insecure. And if you pull a ball out in your warm-up, what's he doing with the ball? Or if you start talking about work-rest ratios, or if you start talking about the orientation of the pitch and how the orientation is going to affect the loading. But then if you actually speak about, okay, think about how the orientation of this pitch is actually going to affect the decision-making and the skill actions, and the talk about like the learning velocity of the group, and how do we develop this, and how do we, scale this over time. Straight away, you can be put back in your box very quickly. Because
or the opposite can happen as well.
Yeah, it can. Yeah, absolutely, it can. Yeah, and it has with me in the past, and things have morphed. Like, I think when I went down to St. Finbarr's first, I went down as an S&C, and it morphed and morphed and morphed, and I had an unbelievably good manager in Ger Cunningham who just trusted it, and he said, "Yeah, I like this," and essentially we have a full tactical periodization model, and it's phenomenal, and I never went in there with the intention of, and it just developed and snowballed. So yeah, absolutely it can. 100% it can.
You can increase the chances of that being successful through how you convey your message and how you deliver the message. However, sometimes the person that's hearing the message or receiving it has to be ready to hear it. And the interesting thing from my perspective is I've had that conversation in different setups in the same year, and it's gone in the polar opposite ways. And you have to be okay with that as a coach, because you just deliver what's needed, I suppose, for the group and what they want you to deliver. It's challenging though, isn't it? Because you turn up to one training session one night and you have a little bit more control, and you're ideas are being listened to, and maybe the good ones are being used, and some of them maybe aren't being used, but in the other avenue or in the other environment, you're simply doing the basics essentially.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to be okay with doing the basics.
Absolutely.
And you have to reframe it and say, as a coach, I'm just going to nail the basics here and do them really, really well.
Yeah.
Have you struggled with that ever?
I think that, have I struggled? I'm gone to the point now where I see everything as a sales pitch. That's the way, and I will actually present based on that. So I will put together a presentation, and I have one where how we lay out our schedule, and I call it crafting winning weeks. How I can design your plan, and I will just use language where this is yours, as coach, this is all yours, this is your game model. Just let me help you to lay out how we're going to build this week out, so what this week looks like. And I think that that's a little bit easier sometimes for to start those conversations, and some coaches are brilliant as well, don't get me wrong. Like, some coaches are really locked in on this, and they have a really clear defined game model, and they will have principles, sub-principles. They will have the match on the Sunday will inform training on Tuesday, will inform training on Friday. They'll be really keen on understanding, okay, what's our planned load here tonight. What have they done in the gym? So, this is talking to this, and we have a far more integrated approach. And it's a lot easier, but in reality, we have a good bit to go there in GA.
But I think we change it one conversation at a time and one job at a time, I suppose. I think the difference is, and some of it can come from how you frame it, as you said, and how you convey that message. But the coach has to view you as assisting them, as opposed to contending with them. And sometimes it can be hard as a young coach to go into a setup and say, look, I think maybe we could do it in this way, but I'm happy to do it in your way if you want, but this is just what I'm putting forward. You don't need to go with that if you don't want to. Rather than, we should do it this way because this is the right way because I said so. I think that's a lesson that young coaches have to learn, though.
It is, and you will learn it, and you learn it very quickly. Yeah, you will learn it very quickly. I think that, like, one of the most powerful things I've done was with a team I worked with a poker chip night. And
I actually saw this,
did
so
you
I
see
did. That
that?
was a great idea.
Yeah, so I forget how much. No, it was a good while ago, but like, everyone was given, let's just say, 10,000 or 1,000 in poker chips. So we had medical, we had coaches, we had selectors. I think, I could be wrong, I think we actually had someone from the club there. So we were getting the club's perspective. We had the players, we had the manager, we had the S&C. And everyone was given like 1,000 euros in chips. And you could place the value of the chips on whatever area you felt the team needed most to go forward. It was amazing because everyone was landing in around the one spot. But like, sometimes...
Was everybody seated together in those groups?
No, they were all,
or did you mismatch?
No, they were all in their groups.
Okay.
So like the players were in their group, the management were in their group, the selectors were in their group, the physio, medical were in their group. Because obviously, like, what you do is the most important thing in your eyes, because you have such a bias to that. And, we can sometimes, finding a middle ground is hard. It's a hard thing to do. And especially in the middle of, like, the only three things you can never be guaranteed in sport is conflict, chaos, and mistakes. That's it. And it's the teams that can bring order to chaos, resolve conflict, and learn from mistakes are the teams that will evolve and go forward. So one of the first things I do with every group I work with is I actually categorize mistakes. And in my eyes, there's three types of mistakes. First of all, you've work rate errors, that you just don't work hard enough, and that's not acceptable. Then you have a concentration mistake, where you're not psychologically or emotionally tuned into what's going on around you. Again, that's not acceptable. But a squeeze mistake. A squeeze mistake is working where you're working at the edge of your ability and something breaks down. Not only is that acceptable, that's rewarded. Because it's from those mistakes that the team grows and you grow as an individual and the team grows as a unit. So I'm always trying to create scenarios where I'm exposing squeeze mistakes. So it nearly looks ugly, because that's where growth happens. And it's a very fine spot because like...
Did you define squeeze mistakes yourself? As in, did you come up with the language around it?
No, I think I got that from Daniel Kyle's book. I'm nearly sure, yeah. It's a squeeze mistake. I think the book, let me think now, I think it could have been The Talent Code. I think it was.
Because it kind of makes you think about the type of mistake that you're going to make, I suppose, is in relation to playing through the lines, playing a risky option. Well, what could be determined as a risky option, but if you never played it, it's always going to be a risky option.
Yeah.
How do you navigate it with a group when, which is very common, I would say, a couple of players are making the majority of squeeze mistakes and others are not making any because they're not playing outside of themselves at all, they're playing within themselves?
Yeah, see, I'd go a level deeper, and when I see a mistake then when I'm analysing a game, I want to understand, okay, was that a decision-making error or was that a skill error?
Okay.
So did he or she make the right decision, but the skill execution left him down? Or, okay, the skill execution was fine, but it was actually the wrong decision to make in the first place. So then we're back to that 4 coactive model. Is this a technical, or is this a tactical, or is this a psychological piece here? So now we can use that 4 coactive model to actually analyse the mistakes we're making and to formulate better solutions to the problems we're seeing.
We love stats in the GA and we love going through game video and footage, but it's always presented in numerical value. This is how many wides we had. This is how many scoring opportunities we had. Does putting everything into that framework for you inform your decision making with training far more, and is it something that you think more clubs should be doing because they're all getting the data anyway?
Yeah, I think if your stats don't refer back to your game model, then it's just noise. That's just so, like, if your game model for the game of hurling is to break it into moments, or football, and depending on your own methodology, your own philosophy, let's just say in the game of hurling you see the game as being 5 moments. At any one time you're either defending, transitioning from defence to attack, attacking, you lose the ball, you're now transitioning from attack back to defence, or the ball hits the ground and there's a contest for possession. So we have our 5 moments. Within those 5 moments, you have your principles. So if you can look at stats and have a defined KPI for each one of those moments, now not only can you understand what moments on the field do we need to develop as a team to improve, so where's the real window of opportunity, but then you can start to inform your training design. So now your training design can directly be representative to what's happening on the field, but with that also solving the right problem. So I think that, so let's just say you were looking at transitioning from defence to back to attack, i.e. your forward has lost the ball and you're looking for turnovers or tackles outside the 45. That could be a KPI for that. Or it could be, the amount of clean balls won in attack. Or if it's transitioning from defence up to attack, it could be how many times do we deliver the ball from an optimal delivery zone. So now all of a sudden you have stats that actually mean something as opposed to total tackles. It doesn't really tell you a lot. I've been involved with teams where we've had more possession, we've ran more and we've lost games.
So have I.
Yeah. We've ran more. I was involved with in a Munster inter-county Munster semi-final, and we still lost the game.
How do you not become too reactive to how you're performing every week when using that model? Is it the planning piece at the start of the year, like you said?
I think that the model becomes a shared mental landscape. That's the most important thing. So that game model becomes a shared mental landscape, not just between the coaches, but the players, the physios, the stats team, everyone. So now everyone understands what the team objective is in every moment. And then if you're a full forward and you find yourself back in the half-back line, you still know what the team objective is on that area of the field. So the game model actually just allows you to bring order to chaos, and it actually allows you simplifying the coaching process. Like, coaching in its bare essence is to make something complex simple. And I found by defining that model and explaining our session design, the theme of our session, based on those moments, that it has actually simplified my coaching, because the players know the why. So you're never being reactive to it, because and it's hard in sport not to be reactive. And there's a difference between reactive and responding. Okay, like someone asked me the other day, what's the difference between reacting and responding? And I always say that, when you react to something, there's a stimulus and there's an action, but there's a piece in the middle. The piece in the there's a little gap there, and in life, even apart from sport, that gap is the biggest freedom you have in life, and that's choice. No matter what the circumstances is, no matter what happens to you, there's a stimulus. You have a little gap there before there's a reaction. So I think that I actually see the game model and the stats that you can collect from the game model as something that actually not just informs training, but actually informs that response.
In relation to pull it back to errors or mistakes, if it is a technical execution error and they're cropping up time and time again, I know you focus a lot on motor learning and skill execution and skill acquisition. In terms of your practice design then, do you typically try to execute a wide variation in terms of the different types of execution of a particular skill or technique in training, so that the players have options, I suppose, or they're able to self-organize when it comes to the game? Or do you try to, when you observe those errors in specific scenarios, try to replicate the scenario and try to get specific with the technical execution? Or is it a merging of both?
It's a merging of both, definitely, yeah. It's a merging of both. Because, so one of the first things I will use in a warm-up is a thing called patterns. So, in hurling training, for example, I could have each line of the field and we'll just run patterns. So it might be working the ball through the lines, or a third man run, and a little bit of shooting, where the inside player is, let's just say, playing with width and depth. So he's preserving the space. So now all of a sudden the half back, when he lifts his head, he can just see the timing of the run. And it's just a little bit of pattern recognition.
Is that contested at all?
It can be. Yeah, it can be. As we warm up, we can start making that contested. And then I'll throw scenarios down from the very start. We win a free, what's our structure? There's a sideline ball here, what's our structure? And we're just moving around the field. It's a great way of warming up, because we still think of the warm-up as being just that physical piece. That's back to what we spoke about a while ago. And again, to me, and this is probably a greater question, how, as a coach, do you conceptualize learning anyway in the first place? And that was when I really got into the skill coaching. What would keep me up at night was trying to understand, is this sticking? Is learning actually really taking place? And as an S&C and a sports scientist, we have all the objective numbers, and if someone is getting stronger, it's very easy to see that, and we can back it up with data, we can back it up with testing, and it's just really clear. But with coaching, it's harder, because there's people and players who in reality train really well, but they just play poorly. They just can't manage that emotional load of game day. They make bad decisions and they play poorly. And you've other lads and ladies, I keep saying lads and ladies, and you've other players who train poorly, but they play well. So if you were to look at 4 quadrants of training well, training poorly, playing well, playing poorly, you can bucket some players in there, and the unicorns are the lads or the ladies who play well and train well.
Some lads don't train at all.
Some lads don't, and still play well. Yeah. There's an irony to it, isn't there? Yeah. There's a paradox to that. But so then I remember I'd be coming home from training and I'd be thinking, Jesus, did that stick? And you reflect on your training sessions, and you sit, I've a reflection diary, and you plan your session. What questioning are you going to use? Where are my moments for reflection? What's the process, which is just simply, what happened? So what? Now what? That's all. Is really simple. What happened? So what? Now what? Because that's really important. You could be on the sideline and someone comes over and says, they're after pulling 3 men out to the middle of the field. So what? That's what's happened. So what? No. And it mightn't be the fact they've pulled someone out to the middle of the field. It could be your decision to change something that actually makes the difference, you know. So
and that could be the whole reason they've pulled 3 out.
there you go. You know, so it's just thinking about these things on a higher level, I think. But and then someone asked me, someone didn't ask me, I asked myself, you know, how do I conceptualize learning and how do I know that there's learning taking place here? Because I'll always see, okay, what have they retained from the last session? So that's where I'll start with some scenarios or some questions. So I'm looking for that brain speed from the start. Okay, where are they here now? You know, what have they retained from the last session? Just 2 or 3, you know, objectives that we were looking. Have they brought that to the next session? And now, you know, what's the velocity of learning within this group? And sometimes you need to manage your expectations and just pull it back a little bit. And like we spoke kind of loosely there about, you know, whether it be random practice, block practice, whether it be, you know, a game-based methodology where we're getting loads of variability in training, or is it going to be very skill-based? And the reality is, like, there is an area for that skill work as well. Like, players like it. It's safe. They feel good. Coaches like it. Managers love it because it looks good. So there's that psychological piece there. Is it the same skill? No. I'd contend it's not even near the same skill. I could stand here with you and hand pass a ball or kick pass a ball or strike a ball and look okay, put me into a game, and that falls apart. So I actually think you nearly have to relearn the skill, but it still doesn't mean that we don't have blocks or units of our session where we have little bits of that.
It's hard to strike the right balance, I suppose, but if you come in without a plan, you're probably less likely to strike a balance at all. And one thing about the GAA that shocked me coming from a rugby lens over was how loose the plans can be for trainings, and how, well, I was going to say loose the learning objectives can be, but they're not apparent, they're just not there. So therefore we can't appreciate whether have we succeeded in this training session, are we getting better, or have we just logged a training session. The other thing that shocked me a little bit was the lack of questioning and I can only speak about the environments I've been in, but from a rugby lens, you're constantly being questioned in training as to why are we doing that, and what could we do in this scenario, and what could we do better here. And in the GAA, at least, there's no shortage of perspectives being shared an awful lot of the time, but it's individual perspectives in isolation, and it's we should do this because such and such, rather than trying to draw it out of the group. And that's what I've seen anyway. Do you think that is an environmental thing, or do you think it's changing?
I think it's, and I'll probably go deep here now, right? I think it's a coach thing. I think that it starts with, first of all, you know, the coach having a clear objective of who he is or who they are first. You know, understand a level of self-awareness, okay? You know, you can, I kind of present on this where I just call this purpose, your identity, you know, how you see yourself, your value system, your belief system. Understand where this is accumulating from. Internal and external awareness. Like internal awareness, how you see yourself, how you recognize your own fears, your own value system, your own beliefs. And then external awareness, how aware of you of how other people view you as well. Emotional intelligence. All these are really, really important, because if you don't know that, and if you're not really clued in to that area of you, then questioning is not a comfortable thing, because there has to be a level of honesty there. You have to be open to maybe hearing things that are going to go against some stuff you've said or how you've set something up. So like half times are a great one. Like, you know, I would love to know, you know, with 10 minutes and a half time, how many groups actually solve problems or make problems worse. You know, like, because you've 10 minutes and like you're in dressing rooms and it's just mayhem. It is mayhem. And there's just noise for the sake of noise. Very little signal. One of the first things I do now is I'll just say to each line in the field, what are you seeing? Simple question. What are you seeing? What are you seeing? What are you seeing? What are you seeing? And co-design a conversation and co-design the solutions. You still have your game model. You still have your principles. That's a given. But put the player back in the centre of that process, and like understand that the reality is when a player goes out over the sideline, you have very little control. That's where your coaching stops. Coaching is done at that point. Whereas this weekend, go up and down the country, you will see the coaching in the game from the sideline, shouting and roaring. And at that point, it's too late. So I think that use of questioning is, first of all, the coach has to be really comfortable with that, right? Because it's going to create dialogue, and it's going to create conversation. It's going to create a narrative. And then you have to be skilled, because there's a massive skill component to that, because there's a thing called paratalk, where some lads, you have to know your people, will just hijack that conversation, and it just goes on and on and on, and there's no real signal in what's being said. So there's definitely a skill to it, and there's a massive skill to questioning and using questions, but really powerful.
It might be a factor and one of the causes but something that stood out to me then from observing players in Gaelic games versus observing them in, say, soccer or rugby, is how mute some of the players are on the field. The level of communication is just not there. Now, is that because they're being told what to do and coached very directly on the pitch and not being asked questions? I don't know, but it just stood out to me that perhaps there was no space for them to voice their opinion on the field because they're being shouted at from the sideline, and everybody's dependent on the coach to shout at them from the sideline because they're not being afforded that opportunity to, I suppose, control themselves in training and in games.
And it's, I'd nearly bring everything back to those 4 coactives. So like, there's definitely a psychological piece of that. Like, to make any environment safe is really, really important. Player has to feel psychologically safe in an environment. It's like, and you'd be amazed with the amount of players who don't feel safe in an environment. And if a player doesn't feel safe, they're going to be very slow to voice their opinion or talk or communicate, because they're very unsure of their standing within their peer group. So that's one area. And there's a vulnerability piece to it as well. Because if you call for a ball and make a mistake, or if you call someone back and something else happens, then you could be seen as the person who initiated something and led to, a poor outcome. So there has to be a level of vulnerability. So there's a psychological piece. There's also a technical and tactical piece to it as well. And from the psychological piece, some lads are just quiet. Is the other side of it. Some lads are just quiet, and it's just not in their nature to be massively vocal. And other lads then are over vocal. And I remember I think it was my grandfather said to me one time. My grandfather was a blacksmith, and he said to me one time, when he was hiring lads to help him, he said there was no one more dangerous than an energetic fool. And I'd often think of, if there's lots of noise and there's a fella directing something and there's not much clarity, and there's definitely, it's not aligned with the objectives of the team, then you could be doing a lot of damage.
Clarity almost requires space and silence in order to be clear. And if it's just constant, then there is no space or silence at all. So it's going to be harder for the players to understand the message, I suppose, or understand what's being expected of them. But we've bypassed almost, which might be a good thing, talking about this last season for you with Tip. Like, some good and some bad, I suppose. Yeah. And as I spoke about with Conor Sweeney, like, sometimes all it takes is one win and you can view your season completely differently to how you would have viewed it previously. What were some of the major challenges this year, and then what were the major lessons you learned through those challenges? Yeah, I suppose,
it's experience is what you get when you don't get what you wanted. That's the famous quote from a really good book called The Last Lecture, Randy Planch. Excellent book. But it's defining what you wanted out of the year there. And again, with the group, first of all, great bunch of lads. Really good bunch of lads. 1 to a man, top class. We didn't get going till late, which means that you're a little bit behind the curve in terms of the work you've done. Then you have, a big cohort from Clonmel, and they had a good run in the Munster Club Championship, so they came in a little bit late. So then you're 3 or 4 weeks looking down the barrel into the National League, and it's crazy to think that, you know, you have such a short lead into a National League, and then you had a big turnover of players, a lot of new players, and like young players going into an inter-county setup. You're now going from playing a boys' game to a men's game.
Mm.
You know, even at club level, you know, the minor who plays senior for the first year, it's nearly a different sport. Like, you have to be an exceptional minor to make a good club team after your minor year. So there's, you know, lads came in, it's a different level of conditioning that, like, we know that the demands of the game are different from a physical standpoint. And, you know, you just pick up some knocks because you're trying to close that space in a short space of time. And but like, we had actually the league, in fairness, we were, you know, really competitive for the first couple of games of the league, and there was a point or two in it, and then, you know, the league probably didn't finish it out as well as we would have hoped. But one or two of those games, it was literally a kick of a ball either way, you know. And then, you know, we regrouped and actually had a good Talton Cup. You know, went up to Antrim. I think it was 2 points. It was a great game of football. Sligo game. Sligo very strong, and they were just far too strong for us on the day. Went up and beat Wexford. It was a great game, and, you know, the Limerick game, we were down a good few bodies at that point, like, you know what I mean. But it was a good game of football, so there's a lot to build on. You know what I mean? There's a lot to build on. It's like everything. Like, year one, it's get lads on the bus. You know, expose them to what's required. You know, at this level, at that level, and, you know, try to get them to buy into the process. And from an S&C standpoint, you really only see the fruits of your labour in year 2, year 3, year 4 as you go on, you know.
It's almost harder at the moment to determine whether it's been success or failure as a year, because I was going to say the lower divisions are extremely competitive, but we're seeing in the All-Ireland now series as well. It's competitive at all levels, so anybody can beat anybody else. And although you can increase the chances that you're going to win, you don't ultimately have control over it. So a couple of results don't go your way, and the year might be determined as a failure, even though you've made great progress towards the next year. It sounds like it almost was more of a developmental focus this year, but obviously you have to be tied to results because it's a results-based business. Yeah,
I think that when you go in, patience is a big thing, because you just have to have patience when you get a young cohort of lads and you're just trying to build a base, and, you know, you just have to be patient. And again, like, it was I think, if I'm to look back there, it was, I forget how many games he played, but it's a long year. Like, I'm just trying, like, even, I know players love games, but even think, like, the Talton Cup is still going on. Like, it's been a long time since McGrath Cup or O'Byrne Cup was played last. So just the new structure, like, it's a tough year. It's a very, very long year with a lot of games. And in Division 4, the problem is, not the problem, but the major consideration is, if you can't get promoted, you can't get relegated. So, you know, like, there's a kind of a period of time there where you're playing games, but, you know, there mightn't be emotionally as much up for them as well. Whereas if you have a chance of being relegated, you're driving that a little bit harder as well, you know.
When you go in with a new group and a younger group like that, you have to have patience with them, obviously. But is one of the focuses for you then trying to just improve their knowledge base of how to be an inter-county athlete? Because they haven't, although they've played at an inter-county level underage, they haven't been an inter-county senior level athlete yet, so they mightn't necessarily know what it takes to compete at the highest level.
Absolutely. A lot of it is, like, year one is forming the relationships, getting to know the players, getting to, like, I always speak about this, like, in terms of my coaching philosophy, or my outlook of coaching is, like, connection is currency. So it's like a strand of a rope. And the more strands you have in that rope, the thicker the rope is. And the thicker the rope becomes, the more you can stretch it. And I see those strands as being your connection to the player. And you know yourself, when you in coaching, if you come on too hard, too strong, and you pull that too quickly, it snaps and the relationship severs. So I think that get to know the players, get to know their two big areas, their wants and their fears. Get to know players' wants, get to know their fears, get to know the person. Get to know what's going on outside of their lives. Get to know what social constraints are there, what, you know, where they are in college, where they are in that phase of their life, where they are in that, I suppose, maturity, social, developmental, I suppose, length or spectrum, sorry. And then, you know, what have they been exposed to? What's their training age? Like some lads hadn't even been on underage panels, and it was their first year ever being involved in intercounty setup. Like, and you know, there was a huge psychological piece of that, because some lads may have imposter syndrome. Do I really, you know, deserve to be in here? This is a huge step up for me, and a mistake is amplified. You know, so yeah, a lot of it is, it's just knowing your people, trying to build the connections, trying to get to understand the culture, the environment. Like, I've been lucky in intercounty. I've worked across, you know, 3 different counties in hurling and football, and for such a small county, even culturally, things are done differently in different counties, and it gives you more analogies to draw back from. But it just, you need to understand where you're going. You need to understand the culture of what's happening in that county, from, you know, from top down, both vertically and horizontally.
Some people would think you can create a culture. You probably can't create it out of nothing, though. You probably have to go in and there's already a culture embedded in the group, and then you can probably attempt to mould it and adapt it to be more successful. What were some of the aspects of the culture that maybe shocked you, or made you think, I didn't expect that, when you went in? And then what were some of the aspects that you've taken from other groups that you've worked with to try to implement?
Yeah, I think that I'll start with the taken from other groups. I think that to me, culture, it's a bit of a buzzword, right? Culture is something that it's there every day. It's just behaviours. So it's behaviours and artefacts. So it's how you feel treated. Just sometimes you just step back and look around, you know, and look at, you know, the behaviours of the people, what the players are doing, how they speak to each other. Like, we ask a lot of intercounty players. Like, you're asking players to, you know, fill out daily wellness forms, to fill out RPs, to make time out of their day to drive to get DEXTAs done. You know, there's nutritionists who is, you know, look at them to count calories or count macros, depending on where they are, or it could be protein. They're doing video analysis. They're doing their own reviews. They're training. They're in the gym twice a week. It's a massive drain on some of these lads. And sometimes a lot of it is you're just trying to take stuff away.
Simplify.
Yeah, you're just trying to remove it. You're trying to take stuff away and give them more space to just to enjoy year one and have a little bit of fun, so that there's a bit of appetite, and that, you know, they're ready to go at it in year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. And you'll only see it, like, you know, I'd go back to my time in Limerick football, and
Do you think sometimes it's too much at once?
can be, yeah. Yeah. Like, there's only so much attentional capacity a player has, and there's only so much adaptive energy an organism has, right? So, like, sometimes take stuff away. Like, I always use that analogy of filling the cup. You know, it'll overflow. You'll just get maladaptations, but the first sign of that is just it's back to your, like, that external self-awareness, reading the room, just reading the room, looking around, reading the room. You can tell generally about how someone presents to training, how keen they are to come. No different to an under 10 coming to local training. You see the under 10 who wants to be there, and you see the lad or the young girl who's been kind of forced by their parents. You know, it's no different with senior players. You once you understand people, or at least are aware enough to try to have some level of conscious thought around other people. That's massively important.
So you were just about to, before I rudely cut across you to ask you another question, you were just about to reflect on time with the Limerick footballers.
Yeah, like, geez, we had a great 4 years. And again, probably the template for, you know, a lot of Division 4 and Division 3 teams, to be honest. Like, you know, Billy came in. Sorry, Billy was in there, so I came in on Billy's second year. And just got lads on the bus. Kept the same cohort of lads. COVID helped, I'll be honest, because we got a massive block of work done. The boys just got a block of work done. Like, we came out of Division 4, Came out of Division 4. I think we won 2 games in Division 4. And then I remember Westmeath beat us in the qualifiers. It was the All-Ireland series that time. And I remember I had a chat with Billy. I said, Bill, we need to get a block of work done. We really need to get a block of work done. And we did. And the boys were brilliant. They really, got that block done during the summer. And then we had a really good start to Division 4 that year. And then COVID came around February. I think we were stopped. Got another block of work done, came back, got out of Division 4. Had a relatively good run in the championship. The following year, went from Division 3 to Division 2. It was brilliant. You know what I mean? But it was just the consistency of just keeping the same bunch of players together. The lads committed to it. We really good injury rates over those 4 years.
Especially in a very hard time, which was COVID too, when injury rates spiked too.
Yeah. Oh no, we were on the money that time. Yeah.
And that can solve a lot of problems for you as well.
It's consistency. So like it's the cardinal principle of consistency in any team sport, and especially high skill sports. If you can consistently turn up to training week in, week out, and not do anything that's going to compromise that from a technical and tactical standpoint, as well as the physical and the psychological, the decision making, that's so important. Whereas if you're consistently missing chunks of your preparation, then you're detraining, not just from a physical standpoint, but you're missing all those rich exposures from a technical and tactical and psychological standpoint as well. The decision making, the understanding the action capabilities of your teammates, understanding the velocities of your teammates, so the timing and the sequencing of runs, so you're back in tune with because teams play as a reflection of how they train. And I think that's probably the one thing that people don't see outside of the bubble. If a team, you can make a slow team look fast if a team plays well together, because the timing of the runs off the shoulder, the execution of the pass, I call it pass welfare. The ball is out in front, so a person isn't breaking stride, and all of a sudden, they're just in flow. They mightn't be individually the fastest group of players, but if your drill design or your small-sided game design is there to promote those aspects of the game, then the skill execution at a relative velocity is really good. That can make you look fast, if that makes sense. And I think that's
a play fast kind of.
Exactly, and that's a training piece. Yeah, that's a training piece. That's so if how you train is going to be a reflection of how you play.
I think, it's in anything we can be quite polarized. So a lot of athletes at the moment are towards either end, where it's either I need to get faster, I need to do way more speed work, or I don't need to do any speed work whatsoever, because it doesn't matter whether I'm fast or not. I can still just play the game. People fail to realize that it's not only playing fast or moving fast, it is thinking fast. It is executing skills fast. It's all of these things together. So therefore, it's integrating everything rather than going towards one thing solely. However, if you run a needs analysis on an athlete, you'll probably identify an area of their game that they potentially need to work on. In that scenario, then potentially you can put it down to, okay, maybe we need to do a little bit more technical work with you so that you can execute a little bit faster. Maybe we need to do more tactical work. We need you to read and scan and perceive what pictures are in front of you on the pitch so that you can respond. I was going to say react, but I said respond in the right way. Or maybe you just don't move fast. Maybe it's a case that we need to go down the rabbit hole of trying to get you to move faster. Maybe you're carrying a little bit of weight. We could get you a little bit leaner, and then as a result of that, you might move faster. But in a lot of cases, it's let's just keep ticking the boxes in relation to all of these to make you an overall better athlete. Do you think a lot of athletes go from polarized approach to polarized approach and rabbit hole to rabbit hole, rather than just saying, I'm going to do all of these things and just be consistent with it and see the results in time?
Yeah, I think the players that probably don't get as good direction definitely do. Because I always ask the question, right? How fast is fast enough? How strong is strong enough? How fit is fit enough? So again, I've referred back to that Game Changer book, but Fergus Connolly calls them functional minimums. So there's a functional minimum that you need to have to play the position of your sport. So then really well-informed S&C who has a lot of skin in the game, because research is a good bit behind what happens in reality. That's just the nature of academia. So that has a lot of skin in the game and understands what the demands are based on the style of play, which is really important, because the style of play is going to influence the decision that the player has to move. That's why you stand up when we do a block of tempo runs, and we all do it, and you blow the whistle. You're just making the decision. You're telling the player when to run and when to stop. There's no real guarantee that that's going to carry over to team play. That's the reality of it. So then how can we recreate environments, scenarios that are going to allow that player the opportunity to express speed in a contextual fashion? So I won't even call them standards, but once we create functional minimums, like, how fast is fast enough? How strong is strong enough? How fit is fit enough? How robust is robust enough? And then all of a sudden we have some markers around body comp the same, and we do have these things. You know what I mean? So we know, okay, that of course there's always going to be a bandwidth, there's always going to be outliers, and there's always going to be, I've had lads who perform really well at intercounty level at 18% body fat, and they perform really, really well. But anyway, the reality is that once you have those functional minimums, once we at least know that, okay, we have this, what becomes way harder is the other stuff. Like, how can you actually, okay, we can look at it, we can measure it, and we can look at really good decision makers. And we know players who are really good decision makers, but it gets harder. It gets harder.
It's definitely harder. It's harder to measure. You can probably measure it in specific scenarios in training in terms of success versus failure, but then what is success and failure, and how specific is that scenario to what's going to happen on game day? It's probably better than doing nothing though at the same time. And that's a rabbit hole that I definitely went down with coaching, because I just got great buy-in from the players. From prior to that, if you're just doing the technical drills and you're just doing sprinting and you're just trying to chase physical outputs, if you do that for 9 months, it gets pretty boring. So if you contextualize it, as you said, and you say, okay, well, now there's a ball here and you have to beat that guy, and then you're through on goal and you have to put it into the back of the net, all of a sudden, it's football, it's hurling, it's why I'm here. I'm not really thinking about how fast I'm going. I'm just trying to go as fast as I can so I can get past them. Yeah. And if you progress that in terms of complexity over time, I suppose, and add a little bit more chaos, as you said, then maybe we're getting closer to the game than we're not. But one thing that I know is we're definitely enjoying it more than we were. And that's your goal as a coach.
And that's what we spoke about probably an hour ago.
Yeah.
That enjoyment piece. And like we spoke about quadrants, and you spoke about like fast thinkers, slow movers. I remember reading a book called 101 Things I Learned in Architecture School. I was on the way to London and I picked it up in Dublin Airport. It was about mental models. It was essentially, right, I have this X amount of square foot to build a house. These are the amount of rooms, and what can I fit in where? And I straight away started to think, coaching, I have a 60-minute block. How many units and where can I fit them? And my mind started working. It was brilliant. They spoke about an awful lot about quadrants. And I started to develop some of these models in terms of fast thinkers, fast movers, slow thinkers, slow movers, slow mover, and so on. And the reality is fast thinkers, fast movers, like, they are the elite. They are the elite. Slow thinkers, slow movers, generally,
sub-elite.
Yeah, sub-elite. That's a good way of putting it. That's a good way of putting it. But a fast mover and a slow thinker, we're back to the energetic fool, can do damage.
Yeah. And the other thing that I'd say is a fast thinker and a slow mover sometimes can be elite.
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Because they're so fast at thinking they don't need to move quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll see that as players get older.
Yeah.
You'll see that as players get older. They've built up such a game awareness, and they've seen scenarios so many times that their brain speed is just so far ahead of everyone else, and they can just position themselves. You see, like, play a game of squash against someone who's good at playing squash.
Who's probably 60.
Yeah, it's probably 16. They just run around the field, around the court. Sorry.
Yeah. And it's harder to measure and harder to coach that. That's probably why we go towards the physical of, let's try to move fast here.
Yeah.
And look, it's better than doing nothing for sure, but you've got to be getting both if you're going to improve as a player rather than simply as an athlete. Quick fire questions to finish.
Yep.
The first one is proudest achievement to date.
Wow. Proudest achievement to date. Don't have any one moment. Yeah, I think life is... I don't get... Yeah, proudest achievement to date. I don't get too locked up on the good days or the bad days. And that's important as a coach. Because all these things are transient. They come and go. And if you get too excited about the good days, you're going to get too low about the bad days. Like, I've had some really good days. I've had some terribly bad days as well. My proudest achievement is, to be honest, like rearing 3 healthy sons and what I would see as having a relatively healthy and functioning family life, considering that I am a 42-year-old coach, because you don't meet too many happily married 42-year-old coaches.
Not very many at all, for sure. That's a way that a lot of the older coaches actually go with the achievement as well. I remember Graham Morris, his proudest achievement was his group of friends that he has and that he still has. So maybe that's something that you learn about life as it goes forward, that look, winning things and achieving things in your sporting career or your professional career are great and everything, but it's not really what life is about.
No.
Favourite athlete of all time?
Favourite, Mike Tyson. Hands down. Yeah, Mike Tyson. Just remember being 14, 15, 16 and Mike Tyson was the man I wanted to be. I remember having the famous photo when he came out of prison and he came out for his first fight and his top was off and he's just ripped, and I was thinking Tyson is just animal.
The baddest man on the planet. What's the biggest thing that you've learned in the last 12 months?
Biggest thing I've learned in the last 12 months? Do a lot of reflecting, to be honest. I do a lot of reflecting, and there's been a lot of things I've learned in the last 12 months. I think that biggest thing I've learned in the last 12 months is that there's just so much you can't control, really. You know, sometimes, back to that first piece about learning to manage, wins and losses, you just have to have a multi-dimensional personality. You can't wrap your self-worth in your job or your sport. And I've, in the last 12 months, become quite good at, that's done. I've, done the best I could do in many ways. And that's across every aspect of life, because there's always disappointment. As I said there, chaos, friction, mistakes. Best players are the player who has the biggest capacity to make mistakes. And I think coaches are the same. And if you don't make those mistakes, then you never get out of, into that area of growth. So I just think that, not taking it too seriously is probably the biggest thing.
It's interesting that you said that, because I was thinking earlier how in order to elevate yourself, I suppose, in terms of your coaching ability and improve your systems, you have to be willing to make those mistakes and try new things. And oftentimes what makes the highlight reel on Instagram or social media or YouTube or what you're talking about on podcasts is everything that went well. But I've tried hundreds of drills that went really, really poorly, that didn't go well at all. And when that occurs, you have to be willing to say, okay, why didn't that go well? Okay, probably won't use that one again. Maybe we can modify it, or maybe I'll just throw it out completely. But if you're not willing to make those mistakes and be a little bit vulnerable in that aspect and try something, you're probably not going to be very original in terms of your coaching.
100%. And you use the word that I was just going to say, that vulnerable piece. Like I'd often sit in front of the group when we're briefing about the plan for the night, and I would say, lads, I've never played this game before. I just actually designed this, so I'm actually trialing this tonight. And like, you're looking at lads, and that's a safe environment to be able to do that. Like, and I've done that this year. I've done that quite a few times where I've said, lads, I've never, and some of them have been brilliant, been really good. And some of them didn't work so well, and you know yourself, you reiterate and you adapt, but the principle will still underpin why we're doing something. But if you don't do that, and you don't allow yourself space to do that, then you're not coaching, you're just copying what the next thing you see.
Absolutely. Last question, what would you tell your 18-year-old self?
There's loads of time.
Perfect. And we had loads of time today, thank God. Adrian, thanks a million for coming in.
Pete, thank you very much for having me, boss. Thank you.